Well, hello world. This must be Thursday, July 30th, and we can clearly see it's 2020. Welcome to this inaugural episode of Prepping Today. Thanks for being here. Let's get this show going. Since this is the first episode, we should start with introductions. Who are you? Let me know in the live chat. Who am I, and why should you care what this random nobody on the internet has to say about anything? Well, you can call me Prepper J, that's J-A-Y, but the A and Y are silent. I've got a wonderful wife who is equal parts beautiful and tolerant of my nonsense, and believe me, there's plenty of nonsense, so... we've got two amazing kids who have to put up with me whether they like it or not. After our first was born, I took on responsibilities I'd been neglecting in my youth. It all started with getting a flashlight after a power outage. It was a good lesson to a new father on being prepared, not just for myself, but for those who were counting on me. So after the flashlight, I bought a cheap first aid kit, and after I opened it up and went through it, I realized just how barely adequate it was. And I started adding to it and gradually replacing bits and pieces of it over time. Eventually I ended up building my own kit from the ground up. I also made an emergency kit to keep in the back of the car, and I bought a couple gas cans to keep filled up in a garage, using them up and refilling them every 6 months or so. Of course, I made a classic prepper bug-out bag, just in case we ever had to evacuate on foot at a moment's notice. The bug-out bag is a sort of rite of passage for a prepper, and even though in most realistic scenarios you're probably going to be better off just staying home or bugging in, going through the process of making a good bug-out bag is a valuable exercise in learning to think like a prepper, trying to figure out what's really necessary and what isn't, what makes sense for your situation where you are, and making sure you've got all your bases covered. I'm sure we'll get into all that sooner or later, but anyway. I got certified in adult and pediatric first aid, CPR, and AED, which are good skills for anyone to have and keep current. It also looks good on a resume. I volunteered with the Community Emergency Response Team, or CERT, in our county. Oh, the green screen's awesome for that. It's a backpack. That is a great program run by the Department of Homeland Security, and I strongly encourage anyone to look into it. See if it's available in your area, anyway. I became a licensed amateur radio or ham radio operator for emergency communications. If the power goes out, if the internet's out, if the phones are down, when all else fails, radio will still work. I became a severe weather spotter with Skywarn for the National Weather Service, and I recommend at least taking the public class to learn what to look for when a bad storm is on the way, even if you don't want to go chasing them down. Currently, I'm in the Master Gardener program at my state university, volunteering to help the public with any and all kinds of gardening information. I'm particularly interested in helping people grow their own food. So these days, I've got a whole collection of gear for all sorts of things. I make my own laundry soap 5 gallons at a time with about $4 worth of shelf-stable materials. I grind wheat by hand to make my own bread and tortillas and pasta. I dehydrate fruits and veggies and jerky and vacuum seal them. We've got cupboards full of mason jars. I eat MREs with the kids as a treat. I wear black Tacticool pants so I have enough pocket space for all the stuff I lug around. I wear wool socks because wool is awesome. And steel-toed boots just in case I accidentally kick a wild chainsaw. And I buzz cut what's left of my own hair, though if I need to be fancy I have my wife trim the edge in the back. Now, there's always more to work on, so please educate me with what you know. I'm also here to learn from you. Prepping is generally a jack-of-all-trades but master of none type of deal. Most preppers, including myself, know a little bit about a lot of different things, but no one's an expert on everything. Now, sooner or later on this channel, I'll probably get something wrong, and I apologize in advance for when that happens. Please call me out in the live chat, but please be a decent human being when you do, okay? Now, ideally, I'd like to look back on this whole thing years from now, cringe with embarrassment, which I'm sure I will, and see that I've learned and progressed. Let's see, anything going on in the live chats, just in case. Alright, let's get going. Now, who I am not. I am not your doctor. I'm not your lawyer, and I'm not your financial advisor. Now, we'll talk about many things which could potentially affect your health and your money. I promise to be honest and share the best information I can, and sometimes I'll say I don't know. But it's your responsibility to make your own decisions. Know thyself, and know thine own local laws. I'm not a prophet, I'm not a psychic, and I'm not a pessimist. I seriously doubt the world is going to end abruptly tomorrow. I mean, it is 2020, but still, what else could happen, right? What could happen? Disasters come in all shapes and sizes. They have different odds of happening. Some are more or less likely or unlikely, but if the potential impact is severe enough, it's at least worth consideration. Disasters affect different spans of time. They could be short-term, long-term, or permanent, becoming the new normal. They affect different people in different areas and different social and economic situations in different ways. You could have a personal disaster. You or someone important to you could suffer a severe injury, or be diagnosed with a disease, or have a heart attack or stroke or aneurysm. You might have a sudden loss of income. You could be the victim of identity theft, or your property might be stolen or damaged from fire or vandalism. Often, though, when people talk about disasters, they're thinking of something wider in scope. Something might impact your neighborhood or city. There might be a tornado or a flood or a natural gas leak, an industrial explosion, a train derailment, a terrorist attack, plane crash, building collapse, or some combination. Let's see how we're looking in the chat here. Good. Alright, let's stay on that one. Now, some disasters can affect an entire region, like a hurricane, an earthquake, or a prolonged power outage. The Northeast blackout of 2003 affected 10 million Canadians and 45 million Americans across 8 different states, directly or indirectly leading to nearly 100 deaths, including some people who relied on electrical devices for medical purposes, some who died of carbon monoxide poisoning after running gas-powered generators indoors. Don't do that. And at least one man who died in a fire started by candles used for lighting. Now, back in 1906, a massive earthquake caused fires to break out across San Francisco, destroying more than 80% of the city and killing more than 3,000 people. This event rightly traumatized California, which has been waiting ever since for the next big one. The U.S. Geological Survey believes the San Andreas Fault has, in fact, now reached a sufficient stress level for a major quake to hit the Los Angeles area at any time, causing a projected $213 billion in damage and about 1,800 deaths. And as bad as that could be, an earthquake off the coast of the Pacific Northwest, in what is known as the Cascadia subduction zone, would probably be many times more devastating. Cascadia can produce what are called megathrust earthquakes, along with tsunamis projected to reach 30 meters or 100 feet tall. For such a quake, FEMA estimates 13,000 deaths and 27,000 injuries, with 1 million people displaced from their homes and another 2.5 million requiring food and water. They also anticipate that about a third of public safety workers won't respond to the disaster due to infrastructure collapse, more concern for their own safety and their loved ones, or being caught up in the casualties themselves. Now, occasionally, there are disasters on a national or international scale, and especially at this level, one disaster can lead to others, making an already bad situation even worse. You might have drastic economic instability, perhaps caused by or leading to military conflict, or the global spread of a highly infectious disease, all hypothetically speaking, of course. At this scale are also rare but real natural disasters, such as the eruption of a supervolcano like Mount Tambora, which spewed massive amounts of volcanic ash and sulfuric acid into the atmosphere, causing a drop in global temperatures and resulting in the year without a summer in 1816, when crops failed around the world and tens of thousands of people died in a massive global famine. In North America, the Yellowstone caldera in Yellowstone National Park is actually a supervolcano, and it comes up in prepping discussions from time to time. but geologists don't believe it's likely to erupt again anytime soon, so you can probably rest easy on that one at least. Now, perhaps more likely for this scale of natural disaster is a solar coronal mass ejection, or CME. This is a large eruption of charged plasma from the surface of the Sun, which, if it were to collide with the Earth, could lead to massive damage to our electrical power grids, as well as the thousands of satellites currently in orbit. This kind of solar storm occurred in September of 1859. It's come to be known as the Carrington event, during which telegraph systems across Europe and North America failed, giving their operators electric shocks and throwing sparks, causing fires. A few operators reported they found they were still able to send and receive messages, even though they had disconnected their power supplies. If a CME of a similar magnitude were to strike today, the effects it would have on our modern technology could be utterly crippling. In fact, on July 23rd of 2012, we just barely missed such a storm, and another could occur at any time with little warning. A similar, but even more devastating effect can actually be intentionally caused by humans, because of course. An electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, can be produced in several ways, most notably with a high-altitude nuclear detonation, which ionizes the stratosphere, causing an amplification effect that can span an entire continent. On July 9th of 1962, the United States conducted the high-altitude detonation known as Starfish Prime, the largest nuclear test ever done in space. It caused an EMP much larger than expected, driving the measuring instrumentation off the charts, and causing electrical damage 900 miles away in Hawaii, knocking out hundreds of streetlights, setting off burglar alarms, and damaging the telephone system, and also forming radiation belts around the planet that caused at least 6 satellites to fail. Today, a single nuclear warhead, detonated at high altitude over Kansas, could absolutely devastate North America from coast to coast, instantly destroying critical infrastructure such as electrical transformers at major distribution nodes for which we have no ready replacements, leading to a nationwide power outage that could last in many areas for more than a year. And that's not the only way the power could go out. The nature of our electrical grid, being constructed in a patchwork over time by a multitude of companies employing technologies as they were being developed, operated by utilities in business to make a profit, and regulated by government officials unfamiliar with the latest advancements in cybersecurity, all leads to a situation where our power grids are incredibly vulnerable to attack over the internet by a foreign government, a terrorist organization, or even a determined individual, any of whom can operate from nearly anywhere in the world and remain potentially untraceable. Cyber warfare is the new frontier for international conflict, with high stakes in the real world, such as not only the power grid, but also banking, healthcare, and of course government and military. Oh, and also, there are at least 13,890 nuclear warheads in the world, 3,750 of which are currently active, held by at least 8 and probably 9 different countries, many of whom really do not like each other, and some of which are run by authoritarians that might do anything out of desperation or revenge if they believe their power is under imminent threat. Now, with all that said, the same basic prepping ideas are useful in many different scenarios. Just for one quick example, having a well-stocked supply of food storage would be useful even if disaster never strikes. You need to eat anyway, so it won't go to waste. But it would also be helpful after a job loss, or in the aftermath of an earthquake or hurricane, or during a severe blizzard, or a shelter-in-place order, or a disruption in the supply chain, or in the midst of widespread crop failures from flooding or drought, or supervolcano, or nuclear winter, or zombies. Fun fact! The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, actually has a zombie preparedness page. And they ran a whole campaign for it and everything with a graphic novel. It's great. Not because zombies are real, but because if you're prepared for a zombie apocalypse, you're actually fairly well prepared for almost any real-world disaster. looking good, sounding good. That's great. All right. Now, what is this channel? Simply put, I want to help people get prepping today. Surprise! I want to provide information, answer questions, and build a community to share knowledge. I'm also here to learn from you. If you're already a seasoned prepper or survivalist, or you've got some specialized information from your experience in your job or volunteering or anything, please share it with us in the live chat or send me an email, preppingtoday@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter @prepping_today. One key idea here is, the more people who are ready for whatever comes, the fewer desperate people there will be when it does. There wouldn't have been quite such a panic for toilet paper if everyone already had a case of it in their basement or closet before the pandemic hit. Or better yet, if they had installed a bidet. Now, a standard example of this idea. Suppose something happens that affects your area, and now no one is able to get food from the grocery store for a couple weeks, maybe more. Most stores these days, to reduce costs and stay competitive, use a just-in-time delivery method, where they only stock what they expect will sell quickly, so there really isn't a large supply of anything in the back room like there used to be. At most, stores generally have about 3 days worth of goods, which would be snapped up much faster as soon as people realize the resupply trucks aren't running anymore. Now, when this disaster strikes, you can rely on what you have saved up, but most of your neighbors likely don't have food on hand, for more than a few days at most. Do you give away everything you have to help as many of them as you can, if only for another day or two? And if you do, what then? And if not, what do you think your neighbors will do when they all start going hungry? When their kids start going hungry? If it was a social norm to have a decent supply of food storage on hand, as it is in some communities, this would go a long way toward keeping many possible disaster scenarios from getting worse. Now, you might think, well, if something like that ever happened, the National Guard would be deployed to hand out meals. Well, sometimes there are disasters so large, and bureaucracy and politics so inert, that it can take a long time, even weeks or months, before responders are able to help. Hurricane Katrina is one example where the response itself was a disaster all its own. Prepping can help you cross the gap. Also, when the preppers do arrive, if you've got your own situation covered, that frees them up to help others who need it more. Along the same lines, if the disaster is big enough, the helpers will probably have other priorities. You aren't going to be number one on their list. One goal of prepping is to minimize reliance. Relatedly, there is the old saying, when seconds count, the police are only minutes away. You can't always rely on an outside response to help you. As another example, from a medical perspective, there's what's called the golden hour after a traumatic injury, the most critical time for successful emergency treatment. If you're 40 minutes away from an emergency room, what can you do in that crucial time? Even if the ambulance is on its way, what can you do until they get there? Also on this channel, as part of sharing knowledge, I want to share and discuss news of interest to preppers. I will not be fear-mongering. There are plenty of channels for that, and I can recommend a few if that's what you're after. But if your goal is to try to predict what might happen tomorrow, it's important to know what's going on today. Now, I don't mind some degree of speculation and discussion, but we'll need to make clear that's what it is, and underline the bare facts of a developing situation first and foremost. I'll also do some book reviews and product recommendations, but that doesn't mean anyone's paying me for them. Believe me, I'd let you know if they were, and I wouldn't promote anything I didn't actually believe in. We'll get to the news and today's book and gear in a bit, but first, let's check the chats. Looking good on both sides, alright. Now, what is prepping? Prepping is recognizing that bad things will happen sooner or later, and taking steps to reduce or eliminate the problems those bad things may cause. Change is a universal constant. It can be slow and gradual, or it can be abrupt and violent. Now, you might think preppers are negative, always focused on the bad things, what can go wrong. Actually, prepping is optimistic. Prepping says problems can be dealt with by planning ahead. It's about achieving peace of mind, gaining comfort and confidence from the fact of your preparations. The biggest enemy of prepping is normalcy bias, the idea that the way things are right now is normal, and it's pretty much always been this way, at least in our lifetimes, and it pretty much always will be. It's the sense that really bad things may have happened long ago, but history is almost detached and unreal. It's something you see in the movies, almost like a sort of fiction, like any other story. Or it may be that bad things happen far away, in other countries, on the other side of the world, to other people, and it doesn't affect you. It can't happen here, it can't happen to me. If it does happen, it won't be that bad. In a high-level way, preppers realize we're always in the middle of history. By its very nature, the future is always uncertain. Progress, whatever that may mean, is not guaranteed, and neither is the stability and continuity of the present situation. Change is inevitable, and life happens unexpectedly. Prepping prevents problems when it can, and when it can't, it makes them less severe. Prepping is just another form of insurance. If you have any kind of insurance, if you wear your seatbelt, if you look both ways before you cross the street, you're already a prepper. You don't wear your seatbelt because you hope or expect to get into an accident. You're generally not going to go driving around looking for something to crash into. But you put your seatbelt on just in case, because accidents can and do happen. Prepping is the very same idea, just applied more broadly. How are we looking? Good. Now, we should address the stereotype, the elephant in the room, doomsday preppers. They must be crazy and paranoid, or they just can't wait for it all to fall apart so they can be the king they never were, so they can be the action hero and punish those bad guys with no consequences, or so they can be the bad guys with no consequences, or just so they don't need to work their crappy job to pay their credit card bills anymore. Of course, almost everyone else is going to die, but not them. First of all, nearly anyone, prepper or not, can understand that civilization exists and persists because it's way, way better than the alternative. Now, there's always room for improvement. No society is perfect, and in fact some have been downright awful. But if things ever went sideways badly enough, no one would be having a good time, at least not for a long while, until some kind of society is built up again. Prepping actually puts everything in a light that encourages deep gratitude for the many things we take for granted. Indoor plumbing with clean drinking water and flushing toilets, heating in winter and air conditioning in summer, electricity that gives us light on demand anytime, anywhere, day or night, freezers and ovens, microwaves and toasters, all manner of electronic toys, and of course, ready access to the sum total of all public human knowledge, which we use mostly for memes and arguing with each other. Well, that and cat videos. The perspective of prepping drives you to evaluate what you have in life, asking, what if you didn't have it anymore? If it broke, do you have the skills and the tools to fix it yourself? Do you have an alternative? Can you do without? Personally, a world without ever having another hot shower is not a place I hope to be. Civilization lets each of us benefit from the specialized work of others, and we all benefit from the economies of scale. Spending a couple dollars for a giant bag of dried beans is much easier than growing and preserving that same amount of beans yourself. And when you're out in your garden watering those beans, and a tick the size of a grain of sand finds itself on your skin, you never feel the bite that infects you with Lyme disease and babesia, and without the modern medical miracle of antibiotics, you'd be facing weeks of fever and chills and fatigue, eventually leading to septic shock, and ultimately death. Fortunately, we have doxycycline, or I wouldn't be here today. And it isn't just beans. We can order online or walk into our local grocery store and spend less than an hour's wage for some exotic fruit grown on the other side of the planet, brought to you by an extensive and efficient global network of producers and distributors. Have you ever really thought about how much actual work is involved in making a cup of coffee from scratch? If the grid does go down, and stays down for at least a while, every little thing is going to be 100 times more work. And every little disposable plastic convenience we have today will be a luxury to treasure. Good, good. Now, let's talk terms. You may see people talking about survivalism, or bushcrafting, or homesteading, or going off-grid. These are all different but related endeavors. At their core, they're all about self-reliance. I've seen people draw a distinction between preppers and survivalists, that preppers seek to preserve the benefits of modern civilization and their current standard of living, while survivalists try to avoid depending on society in the first place, and voluntarily reduce their standard of living to become more ruggedly individualist. This is not universally definitive, and there is much overlap, but it's interesting to keep in mind. Bushcrafters may or may not be survivalists, but their interest is in making use of the resources they can find in a natural environment, while using very few tools and only primitive technology. While a prepper would be more likely to opt for a tent or even an RV, a bushcrafter would gather up some branches and build their own shelter. A bushcrafter might start a fire with flint and steel, while a prepper would prefer to just use a lighter. Again, there's a lot of overlap, and a lot of preppers are interested in bushcraft, seeing it as a last resort option. Now, homesteaders are generally a traditional type of farmer, working a plot of land to grow a subsistence level of food, and often keeping some sort of animals to produce food or materials. Sometimes they'll produce enough to sell or barter the excess. There are urban and suburban homesteaders that seek to accomplish as much of this as they can in their backyards and on their balconies, even on their countertops and in their closets. Now, going off-grid means different things to different people, and no matter what you do or how you do it, someone is bound to claim you're not really off-grid. But generally, it's the idea that you're not dependent on utilities that might fail, like the electrical power grid, a natural gas line, or a municipal water and sewer system. A homestead with a wood stove, a well, a septic tank, and a solar panel is generally the modern image of being off-grid. That said, there are some who feel that having cell phone coverage or internet access counts as being on the grid. Personally, I think, like so many things, it just comes down to a difference in definition. And of course, differences like these lead us to politics. Here on this channel, I want to keep things relatively neutral, not simply to avoid controversy or strikes against the channel from our streaming hosts, but also to provide a place for good faith discussion and debate about the merits of different ideas and how they impact our ability to prepare for the future that we'll hopefully all find ourselves in together. I truly believe that in general, everyone has something of value to contribute, and we can all learn from each other if we actually listen to each other and keep an open mind. Let's have a free market of ideas, but remember there's a social contract not to get this channel #canceled. So, with all the introductory stuff out of the way, we could get into some discussion. We'll talk about anything remotely prepping related if you would want to bring it up in a live chat, or Twitter, at prepping_today, or you can email preppingtoday@protonmail.com. In a bit, we'll get to some news and the gear and book review, but what I brought to talk about today is the prepping umbrella, or the meta hobby of prepping. Now, prepping can incorporate or be built up from many common hobbies and professions. I've got a list here. Camping, hiking, hunting, fishing, trapping, foraging, gardening, farming, cooking and baking, electronics, CB and ham radio, sewing, knitting, crochet, horseback riding, clay target shooting, clay sculpting, leatherworking, construction, plumbing, carpentry, woodworking, weightlifting, running, bicycling, swimming, physical therapy, dentistry, personal finance, precious metal collecting. All of these are useful in prepping. Often, prepping can involve more traditional skills: spinning wool, loom weaving, canning and dehydrating, cooking with cast iron, making candles, soap, cheese, or yogurt, culturing sourdough, fermenting alcohol, distillation, growing herbs, keeping chickens or goats, and so on. There's a good chance that something you're already doing has at least some kind of prepping use. And it doesn't need to be traditionalist. If you're a maker, an electronics hobbyist, and you use Arduino or Raspberry Pi to set up your own security system, that's prepping too. Maybe you're not too worried about the power grid going out, but you're concerned about the possibility of hyperinflation, or needing to flee your country without being able to bring your assets with you, and decide to use your tech savvy to move some of your money into cryptocurrency, just in case. Maybe you play electric guitar and you decide to try out acoustic. Music's great for morale. Getting into prepping can expose you to new things, give you new experiences, help you meet new people, go places you've never been, give you an excuse to learn something you've been curious about but never quite had the push to pursue. What kinds of hobbies or skills do you have that you might think would be useful in some kind of emergency or disaster? Something to think about. How are we looking here? Good, good. Alright, so it's definitely been an interesting news day. Last couple days, really. Of course, the numbers for the second quarter gross domestic product came out, and they are atrocious. They are, in fact, the worst ever reported. On top of that, of course, unemployment continues to rise. Meanwhile, the federal unemployment benefit is set to expire at the end of this month, and here we are. And Congress is deadlocked in their negotiations on the second economic stimulus package. So, not a great scene. Interestingly, 16 minutes after the numbers for the GDP came out, President Trump tweets floating the idea of postponing the elections. Now, a lot of people, I think, rightly recognize this as an attempt to distract from the awful economic news. But, fortunately, even the Republicans recognize that Trump does not have the ability to make that happen, and are not on board with him on that at all. So maybe a bit of good news there. Also, Florida has closed its state-run COVID-19 testing facilities in advance of the arrival of Tropical Storm Isaiah. Not sure I'm pronouncing that right. Something like that. Isaias. I believe that's right. There is the potential, apparently, for it to progress into a hurricane as it rolls up the coast. So they have used that to shut down their testing facilities, coincidentally, just as their cases and death count are skyrocketing. So that's something interesting. A few other interesting things. In northern Iran, a study on people who died of COVID-19 has revealed that more than 20% of them were co-infected with H1N1 influenza, which is considerably higher than numbers typically are for co-infection, which are generally less than 5%. So, that does not bode well for the fall. Also, Iran yesterday conducted a test of some missiles that were launched from underground in a camouflaged missile silo, technology that had not been demonstrated before. Historically, you could see missile silos from spy satellites in orbit or aerial reconnaissance. You could see the locations of where the shield doors would open up to launch the missile. These were camouflaged, and it appears that they had ground above that was lined with explosives, and they detonated those to vaporize that ground to make way for the missile to launch from. So, that's great news. How are we doing here? Future episode on security system how-to. Excellent idea. Actually, I'm already working on a future episode. I had intended for it to come out closer to September on cybersecurity, among other things, tech-related. I might have to throw that in there on that one. So you might have to wait for that one. I kind of want to have it coincide a bit with, there's a big video game coming out called Cyberpunk 2077 that's got a lot of hype around it. So a little bit before that comes out, I wanted to do a cyberpunk theme kind of prepping episode, but we'll get to that. So that'll give me time to look into exactly how people do that with Arduino and Raspberry Pi, setting up their own security systems. I do know that there's a debate on whether a security system, like a camera system in particular, should be wireless or wired. They both have pros and cons. Certainly wireless installation is easier to install, but potentially easier to take down, interfere with, whereas a wired installation, first of all, it's more stable. You don't have to worry about the Wi-Fi dropping out, but it is harder to install. It's a whole thing. We'll get into that sometime. So, how are we doing here? Good, good. All right. Now, let's get to some product recommendations. Now, if you're brand new to prepping, just getting started, and you have just $20 to spend, thinking about our most basic needs, the very first piece of gear you should buy is a Sawyer Mini water filter. This makes it much safer to drink water from a river or lake or pond or some other source you find by filtering out bacteria and protozoa and many viruses that can make you sick. Again, I'm not getting paid to say this, it's strictly my opinion, but everyone should have one of these or something similar. There are other similar filters on the market, like the Life Straw is a very popular one. And it's very, very good, don't get me wrong. I have a couple Life Straws in our car kits. I've recommended them to people. I've even given them out as gifts, but the Sawyer Mini is better for several reasons. First, they cost about the same and do the same basic job, so we're comparing apples to apples here. But the Life Straw only filters down to 0.2 microns, while the Sawyer Mini filters down to 0.1. So the holes or pores in the Mini are smaller and offer more protection. Now, I'm not saying you can catch COVID-19 from drinking water, but strictly as an example, a coronavirus is about 0.125 microns in size, so it would be small enough to pass through a Life Straw, but too big to pass through the Sawyer Mini. Now, the Life Straw is nice because it's one contained unit, and to clean it after use, you just blow back out through it. The Sawyer Mini, on the other hand, has accessories. You use a syringe to clean it out. So that's another thing you need to pack or carry with it. I keep mine together in a Ziploc bag. The Life Straw is more convenient in that regard. However, the Sawyer Mini has two features the Life Straw just doesn't have. First, the Mini can attach to standard bottles. It screws right on, and you can drink right out of the bottle. Where are we here? In fact, yeah, the Mini actually has a collapsible pouch that packs smaller than a bottle that you can open up and then fill from a lake or a river or whatever, and then you screw on the filter and you're good to go. It can even be plugged in line with a tube from a larger water bladder in your hiking pack. You just have it right there and you can drink from the tube from your pack. Now, second, this also means that you can use the Mini to filter water without sucking it into your mouth. You can fill the bag or a bottle and squeeze it out through the filter into another container, so you can then cook or clean with it. The Life Straw just can't do that. Now, both these companies and others have other water filtering products that serve different purposes, like a bottle with a filter straw inside, or a hand pump through a filter to fill a container, or a large reservoir with a filter for a whole family or community. But those are both more expensive and more specific in use. Now, these basic products are the most affordable, and for the mini, the most versatile. Now, the Life Straw is rated to filter up to 1,000 gallons, while the Sawyer Mini claims up to 100,000 gallons. Just how true those numbers are is actually debatable. The real world is, of course, pretty variable, but suffice it to say, if you treat either kind of filter properly, they should at least last for several years. Now, when you're using this kind of filter, you can just stick it in the water source and start drinking. But if possible, it's a good idea to pre-filter any coarse material like sand or sticks or bugs so it doesn't clog up. You can do this by straining the water through a t-shirt or a bandana. Some people pack coffee filters just for this reason. Of course, even with a filter size of 0.1 microns, some substances can get through. In particular, chemical contamination of almost any kind is made up of individual molecules that are much smaller than protozoa, bacteria, and viruses, and much smaller than what these can filter out. If you absolutely need to drink from a source that may contain industrial pollution, if you truly have no other option, filters like these aren't able to help with that. In that specific case, your best bet would be distillation, but that takes a fire and 2 containers and the skill to know how to do it. But for everything short of that, a filter like this is an affordable way to make a huge leap in preparedness, meeting your basic need for safe, clean water, and it should be the first thing you get. Now for the book recommendation. Grab that here. So, I believe it's important to build a prepper library of sorts, a collection of useful information in physical form. So even if the power goes out, or a CME or EMP strikes, you can't pull up Google on your phone, or a PDF on your computer, or an ebook on your Kindle, you can still grab a book off the shelf and find out what you need to know. Now, it's hard to pick just one book to recommend first. There are a lot of general survival guides, some better than others, and there are books that dive deeply into one specific subject, and those are often better at their job than one chapter in a general guide would be. With that in mind, I've selected a book on the specific subject of medical needs. A lot of books about emergency medicine and first aid center around the idea of stabilizing a patient until they can be transported to a proper medical facility. But what if transport isn't an option? Or a proper medical facility, for one reason or another, simply isn't available? Now, I'd bet any seasoned prepper watching this knows exactly what book is coming. It's pretty much standard. The Survival Medicine Handbook is about the best single reference for this you're likely to ever find. There are others, I have several, but this is hands down the one I would recommend to anyone. Again, I'm not being paid to say so, this is just my opinion. To be clear, the idea is, of course, that if you have a medical need, and you have access to the regular medical system, use the regular medical system. If you have a condition and your doctor has given you a prescription, take the prescription. This book is not meant to replace regular medical care when it's still available. This book is meant to help you help yourself or others you may find yourself needing to care for when the regular medical system is not an option. As it says right on the cover, it is the essential guide for when medical help is not on the way. It's written by Dr. Joseph Alton and Nurse Amy Alton, a real medical doctor and a real nurse. And they also have an excellent YouTube channel called Doom and Bloom that's worth checking out. I have the 3rd edition of the book, and each new edition has been revised and majorly expanded, so be sure to get the latest. I recommend reading at least the introduction and the first section completely, and then the other sections as they apply or as they interest you. If you're up for it, it is even better to read the whole thing before you really need it, to lay the groundwork in your head for the skills and gear you should work to acquire while you're still able to do so. There are ranges of checklists of tools and supplies to have on hand, from the very basics to a fully stocked field hospital. It's a good idea to mark sections you find important for quick reference. I've got my copy all marked. What I like most about the book is it's grounded in evidence-based medicine and approaches alternative and traditional medicine cautiously but openly. Some other books of this type start from a naturopathic, homeopathic, or herbalist position that often draws more from hearsay, anecdotes, and custom than it does from verifiable experimentation. This book does recommend particular essential oils for certain mild conditions and suggests some herbs you can grow to substitute for medicine you don't have access to, but it generally does avoid unproven nonsense and straight-up snake oil. Basically, if it's in this book, you can be pretty sure it's legit. How are we looking here? That's the book you have. That's good. It's a good book. Alright, so that is, what are we, 46-ish minutes into this? I've gotten through most of what I wanted to get through, I believe. I actually wanted to show web pages with some of the news items that I had prepared, but this Chromebook that I'm running this on is not up for that task. It's not even close. It couldn't handle it in memory. It was slowing up the stream. I can't do it on this hardware, so this will have to do for now. Well, that is our show, so I hope you all found it useful or at least entertaining. If you did, please consider joining our Patreon to support the show. That's patreon.com/preppingtoday. I'm really hoping to build this up into a sustainable ongoing thing, at least as the lights stay on. I've got so much to talk about, and there's always something new to discuss. If there's something you want me to talk about in the next show, or if you have feedback on this one, or if you just want to say hi, you can email me at preppingtoday@protonmail.com, or find me on Twitter, that's @prepping_today. I'll be back next week. I have been your host, Prepper J, and now more than ever, get prepping today. Thank you very much for watching. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I'll see you next